Am I the a-hole for telling my 9-year-old daughter I don't owe her anything? It may sound harsh if you don't have context. I'm 39 male and have custody of my daughter Rose, 9 female, for only part of the time. I pick her up every other Friday after school and drop her off Monday morning. My ex-wife has her the majority of the time. Rose has been diagnosed with ADHD, and being a parent of a disabled child is harder than with a normal child. I've made many sacrifices for Rose. I still have to monitor her like she's 5 and make sure she doesn't watch TV until homework is done. She's also a bad listener, so I have to show extreme patience. I split costs with my ex for a math tutor because Rose rarely focuses in class. Last week I picked her up and took her grocery shopping. I was listing ingredients for dinner and forgot one. Rose suggested it and I told her she was right. But then she puffed out her chest and said, "No need to thank me," in an arrogant way. At a red light, I turned to her and asked sternly, "Rose, what did you say?" She mumbled, "Never mind." I firmly explained, "That is inconsiderate and disrespectful. I don't owe you anything. I don't have to do half the stuff I do for you." I told her she needs to think about how she talks to me and be grateful. Rose mumbled, "Sorry," and was quiet after that. She sat in the back seat even when I offered the front. I even offered ice cream, but she refused and wouldn't look at me. At home, she did her project without me reminding her, but stayed quiet. She didn't want to watch a movie and was quiet the whole weekend. Tuesday, my ex blew up my phone saying she knows what you told Rose and called me a horrible father. But my ex is the reason Rose acts entitled and still has meltdowns. What am I supposed to do? Stop disciplining Rose just because she throws tantrums? I sacrifice a lot for Rose. I drive her so she doesn't walk 3 miles to school. I buy her toys, and just last month I babysat 3 days while my ex's mom was in the hospital. My own father wasn't around much. He wouldn't buy me things and made me walk home. I don't want Rose to grow up ungrateful like that. Rose isn't a baby anymore. She needs to learn to be grateful when people do things for her, because they don't have to, and her attitude won't work in the real world. I could have been gentler, but sometimes tough love is necessary when coddling won't fix bad behavior. Landlord maliciously compliance themselves. This happened a few years ago in my last apartment. My roommate and I were living in a basement place with upstairs neighbors, and the owner decided he wanted to sell. The upstairs neighbors ended up buying it and became our new landlords, and they were awful at it. I could fill a whole post with the amount of stuff they tried to get away with, but we're here to talk about one particular instance. They had no idea that landlords had responsibilities and simply saw us tenants as a source of income that should be ever-growing, hence our rent suddenly spiking and why we left. But there was one time they maliciously complianced themselves. They had a habit of trying to push stuff on us that was blatantly illegal. Their first contract, for example, said they had the right to enter the apartment at any time they wanted and could go through our stuff because we were living on their property. I pointed out that this was highly illegal, and they grew very upset, saying, "Well, we'll see about that." This clause later suddenly became the real one before we signed. One day, however, our lone fire alarm stopped working. As dutiful tenants, we reached out and said, "Hey, the fire alarm stopped working." Their response was a predictable sort of, "So what? We need to have a working fire alarm," we replied. "And it's the landlord's duty to provide working fire alarms." "No, it's not. You want one, you get it. The law says otherwise." And here's where they maliciously complianced themselves. Tired of being corrected, they got snooty. We got a very sarcastic response. "Oh, it does it? Well, we'll just see what the fire marshal has to say." Me and my roommate burst out laughing. But they were serious. They thought the fire marshal would side with them, and then they could come down on us hard. I don't know what their expressions were when we said, "Okay, yeah, do that." However, the next morning there's frantic knocking at our door. There's the landlord and his family looking very concerned, with a bag of brand-new fire alarms, one for each room, and even 2 spares. He begs to be let in outside of the 24-hour notice and says it's an emergency. He has to put these alarms up right now. Trying not to laugh, we let them in. They hurriedly put one in every single room, apologizing profusely for the delay and saying, "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." I don't know how that meeting with the fire marshal went, but their attitude painted a clear picture of the ultimate result. They complied maliciously, thinking they'd called our bluff. Whoops! Lock my funds because of your mistake? Have your bank's social media ruined? For some reason, God knows why, I thought I'd trust a very small and local credit union with some of my money. When my card recently didn't work on the ATM, I asked for help inside the branch, and a clerk gave me a code to use that would deduct cash directly from my account. This was a feature the bank had, not special treatment. Fast forward a few days, it seems the bank's system flagged my account for review because of some accounting error being late to deduct my balance. I didn't go on overdraft or anything, it was just a minor mistake from their side. And still, for over a month, all my funds were locked, and whenever I'd call my bank support, I was given snarky responses, sometimes even hinting they didn't like my foreign-sounding last name. When I spoke to my family back home to vent about this situation, a younger cousin came up with an idea. Use some Russian service that pays people a few Russian rubles each time to post whatever you ask them on social media. One rub is about a cent, for reference. This service worked like magic. The website even had the option to choose between American-looking profiles and other locales. After the most well-spent $3 of my life and some AI prompts later, the credit union's social media were flooded with hundreds of complaints. I'm sure this got to the right ears because on the very same day, the bank's call center manager personally called me. He said they understood my frustration, and even if I didn't want my account anymore, the bank was ready to transfer my full balance plus $50 compensation to any other bank of my choosing. Problem solved. They probably also realized there was no way to link this activity to me. They hinted at ending things on a positive note. Too bad I can't tell the Russian bots to remove their posts. That will be someone else's problem now. Hurt my friend? Good luck with your education. Part 1. Back in the before times when the internet was still a new thing with lots of potential, I was enrolled at my local junior college. A little into the semester, I moved in with my GF so we could both save on rent. I will call my girlfriend Lucy for the purposes of this post. One night, Lucy says she invited a friend from one of her classes for a game night. It sounded good to me. We invited a couple of other friends, and it was a really fun night. Surprisingly, it turned out her friend, Sarah, was someone I knew from high school. We weren't close friends, but we knew each other and got along fine. After that night, Sarah was invited over pretty frequently for dinner, game nights, or to watch a movie. She even brought her boyfriend over a couple of times. I'll call him Jay, but he never quite fit in. He would be quiet and/or standoffish, wouldn't engage much, and it just seemed like he never wanted to be there. It was clear no one really felt comfortable having him there, but we invited him to be polite to Sarah. Fortunately, he only came over 2 or 3 times and found an excuse to refuse every other time. A month or 2 after this all started, Sarah called my GF crying and asked if she could come over. Of course, we said yes. The story that was relayed was that Jay was getting very upset with Sarah for coming over to our place so frequently and accused her of cheating on him. She never clarified if he thought she was cheating with me, Lucy, or both, but any option was ridiculous and never happened. But he confronted her and started verbally assaulting her, calling her all kinds of nasty names. At one point, she tried to walk past him to leave, and he shoved her back. This caused her to trip over a coffee table, fall, and get a huge bruise on her butt and lower back. Lucy told me about the bruise as Sarah had shown her. I didn't see it for myself. Sarah swore up and down that he had never physically assaulted her before, and she believed it was just an accident. But I was enraged. I wanted revenge. You don't mess with my friends, and you don't assault women. I wanted to beat the crap out of him, but while I'm a very big guy, I've never been in a fight and am not a violent person, but a revenge plan formed in my mind. Hurt my friend? Good luck with your education. Part 2. At the time, I was working in the administration building of the school as a student employee. As part of my job, I could access anyone's student records, their fees, and their class schedule. The date was fast approaching. That was the last possible day to drop or add classes without penalty or specific permission. So I looked Jay up in the system, got his student ID number and the other information that I needed, and put my plan into motion. On the last day to change schedules, I used the dedicated enrollment phones in the administration building. Internet class scheduling wasn't a thing that was set up yet, and canceled all of his classes. Not only that, but I went through and added every class I could find that had a course fee. If you owed a debt at the school, you couldn't get copies or your transcripts or anything else. Something that I didn't mention was that Jay was a foreign student and couldn't stay in the country if he wasn't enrolled with a certain number of units. I wish I could give more info about the fallout, but as I didn't want to get this traced back to me, I didn't tell anyone, nor did I pull up his records again for quite a while. I did get a little payoff, though. Sarah was really worried about seeing him again. She had broken up with him the night after he pushed her, as they had an English class together on Tuesdays. She said that on Tuesday he was there, but there was also someone new standing in the class. He was standing because there weren't enough seats. The teacher, seeing that there were more people than should be held roll call, and guess who wasn't on it? You're right, it was Jay. Apparently, after I dropped all his classes, someone on the wait list got in. Jay tried to argue with the teacher, but as Teach had the official class roster and Jay wasn't on it, there was nothing he could do. Either way, Sarah didn't have to have a class with him, and while he probably deserved more, he was definitely inconvenienced and possibly kicked out of school. Sometimes I worry I was too harsh, but then I remember that he deserved it. Mess with me, but not my friends. The HOA President's Long Goodbye, Part 1. When I moved into my suburban neighborhood, I expected peace and quiet. Instead, I walked into a petty dictatorship run by our HOA president, Todd. Todd was the worst kind of leader, the kind who loved power but hated accountability. He enforced ridiculous rules, like fining people $200 for leaving their trash cans out a minute past 9 a.m., but blatantly ignored the rules when it suited him. His own yard was a mess of unpermitted structures, and his fence was taller than allowed by city ordinances. But Todd's true sin? Using the HOA as his personal piggy bank. At first, I tried reasoning with him. My fence was slightly off color because the approved stain wasn't available, and he fined me $500. I explained, provided receipts, and asked for leniency. Todd smirked, said, "Rules are rules," and walked away. That's when I decided I would take him down not with screaming or public arguments, but methodically, legally, and in a way he'd never recover from. Step 1. Become the inside man. Todd's first mistake was underestimating me. I volunteered for the HOA board under the guise of wanting to get involved in the community. I played the part of the eager, naive newbie perfectly. For 2 years, I attended every meeting, quietly observing how Todd operated. I learned he controlled the board by bullying other members and burying them in paperwork. He'd push through votes when only his allies were present and conveniently lose paperwork submitted by dissenting homeowners. I kept my head down, took detailed notes, and waited. My goal was to outlast his term as president so I could begin making changes. Then I discovered Todd's second mistake. He wasn't just a bully, he was a thief. Step 2. Follow the money. Todd loved to brag about how he kept the HOA's finances in order, but something didn't add up. The annual HOA fees were high, much higher than in similar neighborhoods, but the common areas were falling apart. The pool was closed half the summer due to maintenance issues, and the landscaping looked like it hadn't been touched in months. I started digging. As the HOA treasurer, Todd had access to all the accounts, but he was notoriously cagey about sharing financial details. I asked for the budget during a meeting, and Todd laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry, I've got it under control." I filed a formal request for the financial records, which under HOA rules he was required to provide. Weeks went by with no response. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Turns out I wasn't the only one suspicious. Over a dozen homeowners had requested access to the budget over the years, only to be ignored. One neighbor claimed Todd had used HOA funds to install a new patio at his house, while another swore he'd seen Todd's kids at the community pool during its maintenance closure. Armed with these suspicions, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, forcing Todd to provide the records. He stalled, but I wasn't backing down. The HOA president's long goodbye. Part 2. Step 3. Build the case. When Todd finally handed over the financial documents, they were a mess. Invoices were missing, payments were mislabeled, and some expenses were downright bizarre. A $15,000 landscaping fee paid to a company that didn't exist. Thousands spent on administrative costs with no explanation. I cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Todd was funneling money to his personal accounts. Even better, I discovered Todd had been inflating contractor fees, pocketing the difference, and splitting the profits with his buddy, a shady contractor who handled most of the HOA's maintenance. I compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with spreadsheets, photos, and notarized statements from neighbors who had seen Todd's antics firsthand. Step 4. The coup. I waited for the annual HOA meeting, which was typically a snooze fest attended by only a handful of homeowners. But this time, I made sure people showed up. I spent weeks knocking on doors, explaining what Todd had been up to. I didn't share everything, just enough to get people angry and curious. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Todd started the meeting like usual, droning on about how difficult it was to manage the HOA and how much he'd sacrificed for the community. That's when I stood up. I calmly asked if he could explain some discrepancies in the budget. Todd laughed nervously and said, "I don't think this is the time or place." I replied, "Actually, Todd, it's the perfect time." I handed out copies of my report to everyone in the room. The mood shifted instantly. People started reading, whispering, and then shouting. Todd tried to regain control, but it was too late. I called for a vote to remove him as president. By the end of the night, Todd was out. Step 5. The final blow. After Todd was removed, we hired an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances. They confirmed everything. Todd had embezzled over $50,000, mismanaged tens of thousands more, and committed multiple counts of fraud. We reported him to the police and filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. But it didn't end there. Todd's shady contractor buddy was also exposed and banned from doing business in the county. Todd had to sell his house to pay restitution and legal fees. His name became a running joke in the neighborhood, and no one would touch him professionally. With Todd gone, we restructured the HOA to prevent another dictator from taking over. We implemented term limits, required multiple board members to approve financial decisions, and created an online portal so all homeowners could access budgets and meeting minutes. The aftermath. Every time I walk past Todd's old house, now owned by a lovely family, I smile. The pool is open, the landscaping is beautiful, and the HOA fees are lower than ever. Todd, meanwhile, moved to a neighboring town, where he reportedly tried to join another HOA board, only to be laughed out of the room when someone Googled his name. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated, garnished, and savored. She betrayed me for her friend's sake, so I buried her in Pennies. In the late 90s, I lived in a pretty sweet apartment with a cool little turret room. It was a studio, but it was just me and a cat, so it worked perfectly. I loved the location, but the landlord was difficult. When I first signed the lease, she acted like it was cool that I had a cat, but one time when she came by with the bug guy, she saw my cat and demanded I pay her a pet deposit. I was like, "You didn't mention that before, but cool. Whatever." Things toddle along for a few more months when I get a call. Landlord wants to come by and show her friend the work she did on the place before I moved in, because she was proud of doing it herself. Okay, cool, whatever. The landlord and friend come over, walk around the apartment for a few minutes. Her friend is gushing about how much she loves the place and what she did with it. Yeah, me too. There were definitely some sapphic vibes going on, so I'm thinking, good for you too. A couple of weeks later, my landlord calls and says, "I want you out by the end of the month." I'm like, "Huh? What?" And she tries to say it was because I didn't tell her I had a cat when I moved in, despite us having that discussion and me paying her the pet deposit when asked. I explained this to her. She was adamant, tried to gaslight me, and insisted I had to get out. Turns out her friend fell in love with the place and was in need of a new spot by the end of the month. She never told me this directly, but the downstairs neighbor heard them talking about it on their way out. I ended up finding a much better place to land in a better neighborhood, so I wasn't screwed, but I was still incredibly enraged over the whole thing, due to the fact that she was so horrible and dishonest about the whole thing, so I delayed paying her that last month's rent until move-out day because forget her. On that day, I decided to go down to the bank and cash in the rent amount, like $350, it was the 90s, for pennies. The bank gave me rolled coins, which I promptly opened into a couple of Kroger bags. I moved all my stuff out the day before, so I just met her there for a walkthrough, and when she asked for the rent, I handed her the bags full of pennies. She got red-hot and screamed at me, said I was going to have to wait there while she counted it. First, she tried to get me to count it and roll it, to which I replied, "Nah, bro, I know how much is there. Call me if it's short." But they aren't wearing ties. I saw a similar story that reminded me of mine. Many years ago, I worked at a print shop that no longer has its original name, but people still call it by its original name and is notorious for iffy customer service. Side note, one of the main reasons is that we encountered the most ridiculous asks, so when a perfectly reasonable request came through, we were already sitting on ready to engage in the madness. Apologies for anyone who was reasonable. Anyway, we were a pretty laid-back island of misfits store, grad students, wayward musicians, lifers, tokers, and single moms who worked 2 jobs, but collectively got ish done. P&L unmatched to the smoke breaks taken. Our uniforms were navy pants and a button-down shirt, long or short sleeve and dealer's choice, and could even order a cardigan sweater, which all came from the corporate catalog. We get a new district manager who does a store visit. She determines that the men were not adhering to the official uniform because none of them were wearing ties. Pause. The reason why? We have an industrial-size laminating machine that was diabolical and easily snatched up ties. Just a general choking hazard and made absolutely no sense to wear to do this job. She threatens to write up anyone non-compliant and puts our store on notice. Quiet Storm Gill, not his real name, says bet. He reviews the handbook and sees that both neckties and bow ties are acceptable with no additional descriptions. So he orders a box of what can only be called the comical clown collection of bow ties from eBay, puts them in the break room and tells the store to have at it. We are talking about polka dots, paisley, stripes in every color of the rainbow, and of ridiculous size proportions. Honestly, a joy to witness. Customers are like, "This is interesting," which, by the way, makes Gil and others grumpy because they are taking a stance, not trying to spend more time with customers. A month later, district manager visits again. We have now normalized the bow ties. She is livid. She speaks to our store manager, who shows her the employee handbook and points out how it doesn't provide color or size parameters, and technically, they are all compliant and have taken her warning seriously. After she leaves, our store manager says that they no longer have to wear ties, and it is up to the discretion of each employee if they want to wear a tie on shift. Every now and then, someone would walk onto the floor with a polka dot reminder. Follow One Above All Reddit, and let us know what you think in the comments.